Did you know that vets are the only medical profession that recommends dry processed food diets for the life of your pet? Yeah, it sounds a little bit crazy when we start thinking about what would you do if you went to, say, your pediatrician with your new baby and they recommended Cheerios for their entire life of your kid's life. You'd look at them and be like, oh, wait a second, doc, that's not correct. How is that okay? But when we look at Cheerios versus, say, like dry food, we can see, okay, yes, there's vitamins and minerals and nutrients added to it to make it complete and balanced. So, we're going to be talking today about a very controversial subject. And I want to hear from you guys as you tune in to this week's Coffee Talk, if maybe you've been in the situation that we're going to be talking about. Because what I'm going to cover are the myths versus the truths behind that raw food diet. So, looking at why do vets hate raw food diets? And let me know in the comment section, have you come up against the vet where they've looked at you, maybe you're feeding a raw food diet or a fresh food diet, and they've been like, you're going to harm your pet. They may have even said, you're going to kill your pet. So that's what we're going to cover today. If you're new here, welcome. If you're returning, welcome back. I'm Dr. Katie Woodley, the natural pet doctor. I'm a holistic veterinarian who's on a mission to make sure you, as the amazing pet parent that you are, feel empowered with the tools and support to help your pets live their most best, vibrant life possible. And one of the pillars of health that will help you achieve that goal is nutrition. But here's the problem, right? You may be wondering, like, okay, I have no idea what to feed. But when I look at this and I start thinking about why would a processed food diet be better, and you start having that conversation with your vet, you may hear some of these common myths and you're like, I don't know what to do. I don't want to create harm. So let's dive into what some of these common myths are. We're not going to have time to cover all of them today. See you guys. Hey, David. Hey, David, by the way, you're where my mom grew up in Rochester, New York. But I see you guys and I appreciate you. Drop your comments. I'm seeing these as we go through this, because this is a huge controversial area and topic that we need to make sure that you feel confident so you can best advocate for your pets when you go into the vet and have that conversation with them. So we're going to cover some of the top ones that I hear from my clients when they go into the vet. And I'm also covering some of the things that some of the vets I've worked with have actually said to some of our clients for the patients. So number one, who here has ever heard this myth? The risk of the pathogenic bacteria. You're going to die from the E. coli and Salmonella poisoning. Your pets are going to die from it, and you're also going to die from it, or you're going to get really, really sick. Who here has heard this from their veterinarian or read it online? Maybe you come across a forum or a Facebook group where you're talking about what you're feeding and how your pet improved and all those things. And you're like, I'm confused. Like, wait a second. Let's break this myth down, okay? So essentially, this is true with any type of food, right? I mean, if you're a meat eater, you eat chicken, there's a high risk of your salmonella on the chicken that when you go to the grocery store. So we don't eat raw meat. Maybe some people do, but it's not necessarily your risk of contracting a foodborne illness is definitely higher when we aren't cooking that meat, especially chicken. Now, so when we think about that, okay, well, why would a raw food diet? Okay, so maybe there is a higher risk. We're not cooking it, we're not killing those foodborne illnesses. But I want you to think about all the different types of foods that your pet can be exposed to, that you can be exposed to, especially when you're cooking the food, and anything else your pet can lick or eat. Okay, so case in point, who here has a dog that's ever eaten their own poop or their cat's poop? Right? Did they die from it? Most likely not. Maybe some pets will get an upset tummy from that, or they might pick up things like giardia or, things like that. But here's the thing. So many animals will eat their own poop because it's a pre-digested thing. It can indicate a microbiome imbalance. There's a lot of reasons for that we've talked about in terms of gut health and microbiome. But when we start looking at the anatomy and the physiology of our dogs and cats, they're actually made for a raw food diet. Even just starting from the dental structure and how their teeth are anatomically, they're made to tear and shear and chew and break down those bones. They are not an omnivore like we are. You can see that by just looking at like the dental structure. Like my teeth are not made for shearing and tearing and ripping apart meat. Yes, we can do that, but I need a knife, right? And also, too, I can move my jaw side to side, right? Dogs and cats can't. Up and down because they're ripping apart those meat. They don't have the premolars and molars like we do in our mouths to grind up plant material and help start that pre-digestion. Our dogs and our cats have shorter GI tracts. They also have a more acidic environment that kills those pathogens. They are the ultimate raw food machines. They are made that way to break down that food, process it, and digest it. And that's where their microbiome is optimized. The microbiome is this key component of their health with trillions of different types of microorganisms, fungi, bacteria, protozoa that are going to help with that digestion, producing vitamins and minerals, neurotransmitters that are going to make sure that their body's working as well as possible. So this is really, really important where we're looking at this. Okay, our pets are made for these diets. So why are we so scared about feeding these foods, these types of foods? So I want to go through some of the literature, right? Because this is what your veterinarian will see. We don't get a lot of nutrition education in vet school. I can tell you I got more education on how to measure grass for the sheep and the goats and the cows and the cattle and all that stuff and how their digestion works from a production animal perspective than I did on what diets to feed dogs and cats for appropriate health, other than learning about prescription diets. So there's actually a study. So going back to, okay, the risk is real, right? There is pathogens that we can get sick from because we are not made the way that our dogs and cats are. But a study in the Journal of Animal Physiology and Animal Nutrition found that feeding dogs a raw meat diet actually increased the beneficial bacteria. So there's that bacteria in their gut, and that included things like lactobacillus, and it also decreased pathogenic bacteria like Clostridium perfringens. So this is what can make them really sick. This is where we see like acute diarrhea, colitis, we see bloody stools, lots of gas, urgency. These are the things that usually like you end up in the ER with your pets because they get really, really sick. But when we look at some of these studies, because our pets are made for these raw food diets, it's actually suitable for maintaining an optimal microbiome. Now, also too, when we look at, okay, well, what about my vet saying like they're going to get really, really sick, right? We're going to get sick in the household. Well, back in 2019, there was actually a survey done of more than 16,000 households feeding raw food diets. And only three out of 16,000 households identified a pathogen in both the pet and the human, meaning there was a 99.6% level of safety. Really, wow, look at that, right? So when it comes down to it, once again, common sense. If you're feeding your pets a raw food diet, use good food prep, cleanliness, hygienic practices, wash your hands. If your pets, have a lot of hair around their face, and it can be quite messy, right? Watching cats and dogs eat, watching our cats eat a raw food diet. Sometimes Moki, our little cerebellar hypoplasia cat, will pick up like chunks of his raw food and take it over to our mat by the sliding glass door. And I'm like, thanks, Moki. Like, we really don't need that there. So being aware of that, but keeping things clean and washing your hands is really, really important. So, just like the same things you would do for yourself if you're cooking chicken, right? If you're cooking chicken for dinner, you're most likely like not prepping it and cutting it. And then you're like licking your hands and like touching your face and all that. Like most people should not do that, right? Well, everyone should not do that. Most people won't do that because of the foodborne pathogens and the illness that we can have. Now, I also want to go through another study in 2007 where there were 132 documented cases of humans infected with salmonella from contact with dry dog food. More than half of the children were under age 2. And during the same time frame, only 4 reported cases of salmonella in humans linked to raw feeding of dogs. So there's this myth in the veterinary profession that kibble is much safer than a raw food diet. But when we actually look at the research and we go back to, is it truly, and we start asking those questions versus just believing what the pet food industry is telling us, we can actually see that it's not. There are more reported cases of salmonella and foodborne illness from the kibble diet. Why would it be in children under age 2? Like when we think about, okay, well, why the younger kids? Yes, possibly immune system. But think about, like, what do your kids do? They get into everything. They're probably around where the dog is. They're probably even potentially eating the kibble, right? They're over there eating it. I see people like, oh, look, I would eat it. And I'm like, please don't. You probably get salmonella. Like that would never go anywhere near my mouth. Think about all the rancid fats, like the oiliness, all that junk that's sprayed on it, not even to mention like how it's produced and processed and the inflammatory ingredients that are part of kibble. But now we know, and a lot of us have known for a while, that the risk of salmonella is actually higher. So these are things that you can take to your vet and say, hey, well, what about this survey? What about this study? What about the actual research? What are your thoughts on that? You don't have to say you're wrong, but what are your thoughts on this? And remember, wash your hands, practice good food hygiene. So I think that breaks, that's not even all of the studies that are out there, but it's just a brief summary of myth number 1, the risk of pathogenic bacteria and why raw food diets aren't going to kill your pet. And if you're also practicing good hygiene, you'll keep yourself safe. Does everyone think like thumbs up on that, right? Like feel a little bit more confident, like going to your vet and having that conversation, and definitely knowing what, like how to proceed with that. And Mama Bear, I love that question because that's myth number 2. Raw diets are unbalanced. There are nutritional deficiencies. This is another common myth that is brought up by numerous veterinary professionals. And I'm sure once this is like recorded and put up, there may be some discussion in the comments. I welcome it. It's important for us to have open conversations about this. So it comes down to when we're thinking about this. So raw diets being unbalanced, yes, they can be, especially if we're putting together food and we're not thinking about the nutritional requirements of our dogs or our cats. And we're just using like meat, especially. I see that all the time. I started feeding like chicken meat to my cat. And I'm like, do you have bones? Do you have organ meats? Do you have extra taurine, like vitamin D, all the things, vitamin E, zinc, all these things can be deficient in an unbalanced over time raw food diet. But the other thing too is we need to think about the natural versus synthetic vitamins and minerals. So of course, natural vitamins that are part of whole food are going to be better absorbed than say a synthetic mineral complex or something that's been cooked at really high heat temperatures. So when we look at kibble, what they have to do, because they cook it at really high heat temperatures, at least 4 times. And it's going to destroy any vitamins and minerals. And that's potentially including those synthetic vitamins and minerals too. They have to add those in. So what they're doing is they're balancing it according to the minimum requirements by AFCO standards prior to the cooking process. Are they testing it afterwards? Usually not. So we go through this high heat cooking process. We're relying on our pets absorbing synthetic vitamins and minerals. We know that pets don't absorb these things very well, and especially human side. Like we need to be eating a variety of foods and changing around our diet. And the same applies for our dogs and cats. And so that bioavailability is the term that we use on how well is that food absorbed? How well is it digested? How well is those vitamins and minerals being absorbed by the body to do what we need them to do? Now, one of the things I want to bring up in the vet world, and this is something that a vet will always go back to, it's like the nutrition Bible, is this small animal clinical nutrition book. I have it. I never use it. It was one of the biggest wastes of money that I've ever bought. And it's written by Mark Morris Institute. Now, here's the thing. whenever like you want to learn something, I always say follow the trail, right? Whether it's a money trail, who owns who, start asking those better questions, right? I always talk about how to ask why. Ask why. Like, okay, well, why is a kibble diet better? That's a great question to ask the vet. Okay, what is the research behind that? Why are we using that antibiotic? Okay, well, why is this small animal clinical nutrition book the best thing that all veterinary nutritionists, this is the Bible, right? Okay, well, when we look at where does this come from? Okay, we have the Mark Morris Institute. It's a subsidiary of Colgate Palmolive. Huh. Wait a second. Don't they make like cleaning products and like toothpaste and all sorts of chemicals and things, right? Okay, wait. So what else do they make? They are the manufacturer of Hill Scientific and Prescription Diets. I can tell you the number one thing that I was the most disappointed in when I bought this book years ago, because I was like, I want to learn more. I want to make sure I'm doing the best for formulating diets for my pets. And I like started flipping through and I was like, there is nothing useful in this. It literally just tells you as a veterinarian what prescription foods to feed. It doesn't tell you how to formulate veterinary diets. I had to take integrative holistic courses on this and courses from other like pet nutritionists and things like that to learn this information as a veterinarian, because I wasn't taught it in vet school, but this is what they refer to. So when we think about, okay, well, if we're getting all of our nutritional information from someone who is subsidized by the pet food company who is pumping out dry food kibble diets and have a financial interest in this, do I fully trust it? Right? Now, a balanced diet is better than an unbalanced diet like hands down, 100% of the time. Okay. So don't get me wrong with that. So if we're going to only feed like meat long term, your pet might improve with their health, their coat short term, but long term, it's going to lead to nutritional imbalances. So we need to make sure that we are balancing this raw food diet, balancing over time. Not every meal has to be perfectly balanced, but we need to be thinking about, okay, well, we need some meat, we need some bone, and there's different ratios. I'm not going to go into that because there's a lot of great resources online. I'm going to list some of those off at the end so you can dive more into this to make sure that you're doing what you need to. And also, too, if you need help with this, we also have a simple guide to improving your pet's food. There's a link in our bio, and there's a downloadable in our store on the naturalpetdoctor.com. So download that so you can start getting into these resources and making sure that you're doing the best for your pet. But we need to take a step back again. Once again, Cheerios are not the best for a human for every single meal over the life of the human because of those synthetic vitamins and minerals. We're not going to absorb it. I'm sorry, but it's not good for you long term. It's full of glyphosate also. We're not even going to cover that. But these raw food diets, when we're balancing them and we're feeding variety, are full of natural enzymes, those natural natural vitamins and minerals versus kibble that's highly processed, cooked at high heat temperatures, has inflammatory ingredients like your advanced glycation end products, all sorts of things that are in them using poor quality ingredients. And then we're hoping that that minimum amount of synthetic vitamins and minerals is going to cover our pets long term. This is why over time we start seeing skin issues, allergies, GI issues, autoimmune disease. Over 50% of cats and dogs will be diagnosed with cancer at some point in their life. And we have to start asking why. And synthetic processed foods are a huge part of that. So that's my piece there. So keeping in mind, and thank you, Ryan just dropped a link to that simple guide to optimizing your pet's food. Now, I want to go back to another myth. All right. So, myth number 3, raw feeding causes aggression. So, it's like they become bloodthirsty beasts, and you're like, oh my God, my cat's going to kill me at night. And all those memes, don't help with that myth, right? Like the cats and, they're individuals and all the things, right? But your dog also, I promise you, like, because they get a taste for blood, they're not going to come at you. They're not going to attack your children. It does not create aggression. And when we look back at the science, the reverse is opposite. Think about what happens and we have a cat who eats like prey model raw. So we rotate that with some other pre-made balanced raw food options too, but he loves his prey model raw, chewing on like the actual little ant. It's not alive, so don't worry, like it's okay. but that's what he's made to do. Like, he knows what he's supposed to eat. And one of the things that's fascinating with him, bloodthirsty, right, Nosley? Bloodthirsty little creatures running around in your house, like little vampires. They're going to take you out, not the truth. But when you think about it and you watch your dog if they're chewing on a raw meaty bone. Watch your cat when they're eating, if they're eating, like chewing on bones, like raw meaty bones. Don't ever feed cooked bones. We did a dental health coffee talk last week, so check that out. It's under our recordings, all about dental health and bones. And we also have a Safe Bones blog post at thenaturalpetdoctor.com. Now, in terms of when you're watching them, they're like in heaven. Watching Tico chew on he's just like, oh, and his eyes are like, oh, he's just so happy, so happy. And dogs are happy. And the reason why is when they're actually chewing on bones, they're releasing dopamine, which is a neurotransmitter. And dopamine eventually gets turned into serotonin. Serotonin is that feel good hormone, right? You hug your kids, you look lovingly into your cat's eyes, right? Like, if you don't have children, I don't, but just being present with my pets, and like, Kiwi, my senior cat, will like literally hug me and just like look into my eyes, and like my heart is just so full. The reason that we feel that way is the serotonin that's being produced. And when they're gnawing and chewing, they've actually shown that that hormone is being produced. Or that neurotransmitter, actually. The other thing too is that raw diet. There's studies that show the high carb kibble diets versus a raw food diet will manipulate and change the different types of bacteria that are present in the microbiome. And when we feed a raw food diet, because it's a species appropriate diet, remember myth number one, they're actually made to eat these types of diets. And so the right balance of foods and natural food, whole food, species appropriate diets are going to feed the right types of bacteria and the right balance in that microbiome. Now, here's the reason why this is so important. That 90% of serotonin is being produced in the gut. So if we're feeding a food that's not a species appropriate diet, what will that do to the gut? It's going to create potentially that dysbiosis. We have bad bacteria outnumbering the good. We're going to have less serotonin produced. And then we take that step back and we look at the holistic approach. Remember, everything is interconnected. And we know that there's a gut-brain axis, very strong connection there through the vagus nerve. And if serotonin is not being produced at the right level, it's not going to impact the brain the way it's supposed to. So we have less serotonin. What are some of the symptoms we might see in our pets if they're not producing enough serotonin? Behavior issues. So maybe aggression, but a lot of times like fearfulness. They're like kind of jittery, right? They're jumpy. They're fearful, so fearful, jittery, jumping. You might notice behavior changes like all of a sudden they're just not as social, or they feel down or depressed. And that can come down to the food that we're feeding. So if we're seeing those changes, we have to think about, okay, well, am I feeding the right type of diet? Are there other factors that are affecting this too? So if all of a sudden you change the diet, we're manipulating the microbiome, and you see a behavior change, or you see something change and physically with them and you're worried, make sure that you get it checked out at the vet, because 9 times out of 10, it's not going to be due to the raw food unless it's not a balanced diet over long term. It's going to be due to something else. There's a lot of medical conditions that can cause these problems where your vet will attribute it and blame everything on a raw food diet, when it could actually be something like an endocrine imbalance, like hypothyroidism. It could be in an older pet. I went through this with Finn, a brain tumor. It could be something like a vaccinosis, where say maybe a month ago you gave a rabies vaccine and now your pet's like having a vaccinosis reaction and you're seeing this aggressive behavior change. Has literally nothing to do with the food that you are feeding, but it's commonly missed by your traditional veterinarian because they're not familiar with a lot of this information or aware what vaccinosis are or believe in them, even though we see it all the time in the holistic realm and we have to detox those pets. So we need to, not close us, like box ourselves in with this statement that it's all due to raw food. because we need to take that step back, not miss the forest for the trees by focusing on one little tiny thing, which the vets do. I see it in reports. I saw it in one of our Blueprint members. She's amazing. She's in Singapore. Her cat's currently going through GI cancer, lymphoma, started on herbs. The cat started picking back up and eating and doing really, really well. But I noticed in one of the ultrasound reports she posted in our community that I took a look at the other day, like there's some inflammation, there's some GI lining thickening. The cat's doing great though, which is the goal whenever we have cancer, is always treat the pet. We're not treating the cancer. And they actually wrote in the notes, it could be due to IBD, it could be due to the lymphoma, or it could be due to the owner feeding a raw food diet. And I was like, oh, seriously? Like, what? And it just blew my mind. So that's the thing. That is the logic of a lot of times the veterinarian when you're going to them, is that every single disease condition is due to a raw food diet. But once again, taking that step back, thinking about the physiology of what's actually occurring, looking at what is a species appropriate diet, looking at the microbiome, looking at all these connections, right? How everything is interconnected, and putting those puzzle pieces together and just coming up with common sense, right? Like literally, it's not going to make your pets aggressive. Your dog might resource guard, or your cat might resource guard because they're all like, hey, this is super exciting. This bone is awesome. And they love it. So it's a high value treat. It's not aggression. So we have to look at it from a behavior perspective too, and what they're showing us. All right. The last myth, and it's not all the myths, right? There's just not enough time to cover all the myths, but these are to get you started, and I'll share some resources, is that raw food is too expensive. Who here, possibly large breed dogs, right? Those are the hardest sometimes to, when you're transitioning from a kibble diet over to a raw food diet or a lightly cooked. And this isn't to say like all pets have to be on raw food. There are some pets that don't do well with raw food because of microbiome issues, gut health issues, for whatever reason. There's a lot of reasons. So this is just going over some raw food myths. But fresh food can sometimes seem more expensive when we're looking at the cost value. But I want you to I want to shift your perspective a little bit, because I've had 3 pets with cancer and it was really, really expensive. So Finn had a brain tumor that created the symptom of seizures, and his last year of life cost us over $10,000. It was quite a bit. And I'm a veterinarian, right? I mean, we had to use specialists and, get certain diagnostics done. We also had 2 cats pass from aggressive GI lymphoma. And we did do 6 months of chemo with one of them. And that was quite a few years ago. Now there's lots more tools in my toolbox, not against chemo, but weighing up those options. However, it's not cheap. And so when we look at the cost of food, I want you to think about, okay, right now in this moment of time, this is the cost. But what is the future cost to me if I continue to feed my pets a species inappropriate diet that isn't feeding their microbiome, that's creating inflammation in their body, and can lead to expensive diseases down the road? And it doesn't always happen. I'm not saying it will happen. And I'm sure people will be like, I fed, Old Roy and all the other, some cheap brands out there, and we never had an issue. My dog or cat lived to 18. My question for them is always, imagine what would have happened if we had fed like more fresh food in that diet. Like that pet probably would have lived to be like 30, 35, because they obviously had a strong constitution. So I want you to think about, because my entire day, every day, especially as I've shifted over the last, 7, almost, 8, 9 years to solely like an integrative, holistic perspective of treating my patients, is I deal with chronic health diseases. And this is where you can take the proactive approach. And it might seem like it's more expensive up front, but the thing is that the cost of those veterinary vet visits and illnesses will add up significantly to a lot more, not only in financial cost, the stress and the worry, and a shortened life. And I know hopefully you feel the same way that I do. I look at my current animals, I look at my past pets that I've had, and I wish I knew what I knew now to go back and change those things. I don't have guilt. I've released that. I've healed that. It's quite a process. But with my current cats, especially, I want to know that I did everything possible and I have no regrets when it comes to the end of their life. Whatever way they pass, I did all I could. And optimizing the food is a key foundation for doing that. And so our 3 cats are not cheap. But I also choose to feed like some pre-made balanced raw food diets because of just time-wise, it's easier for me. I trust those companies. But I know long term, especially with, our cats came to us with a lot of health conditions. They weren't healthy. We had to get them back to health. So we're already starting a step behind. So I need to do as much as possible. But I want you to think about, you may have a pet that has some of these diseases, diabetes. They may be overweight or obese. They may have heart disease, chronic pancreatitis, kidney disease, dental disease, allergies, itchiness, ear infections, anal gland issues, GI disease. All of these come down to the food that we're feeding because of the connection with every other part of the body. So if we can get away from those processed food diets, even if it's something where you can just start adding in some of these superfood toppers, fresh food options. We have a lot of videos on our YouTube channel and blog posts at thenaturalpetdoctor.com to check out to help you get started. There's also the free guide that I mentioned, that simple guide to improving your pet's food. That will make a difference. So if you can't do 100% of a transition or a shift for whatever reason, financially, time, whatever reason it is, start adding in some of these foods. Start adding in some fresh foods. See if you can introduce raw meaty bones. See if you can introduce in some like freeze-dried organ treats, some air-dried treats, so you're supplementing that food. And to keep costs down, there's ways to go to like check out co-ops for reduce like costs on the meats and the organs. Go to the local farmers. A lot of times they're throwing out like the organs, and you can take that and you can create your own balanced diets. Once you get the hang of it, it's pretty easy. It's not super hard. And also too, like going to local farmer markets. I know here in Fort Collins, there's also discount like grocery stores where you can volunteer your time, and then or you can like support them by giving them money for their nonprofit, and you can take like foods or things that were expired from grocery stores but are still fine to eat, and you can use those to make your pets diets. So there's a lot of ways. We just have to get a little bit creative to help bring down sometimes what initially seems like a much higher cost. But I want you to shift that perspective. And so even though it's, you're like, oh, that's not going to be me. Well, I thought that too, until the night Finn started having a seizure and we diagnosed a brain tumor. I thought that too, until the day that I diagnosed a big mass in my cat's abdomen. They seemed fine. And then the next day they weren't. And I don't want you to have to go through what I went through with my pets, because a lot of it is preventable. We can't prevent everything, but there's so many things and so many tools that we can use that aren't really hard or difficult once we get the hang of it and how to implement that for our pets' lives. So make sure you check out some of those resources and add in fresh food. Work with a pet nutritionist, partner with a veterinarian that is an advocate for raw food diets, believes in the power of nutrition, that understands the physiology and the anatomy of our dogs and cats, and believes in this and believes that everything is interconnected and practices that way. Those are the ones that you want to partner with, follow with. There's lots of great information online. I hope you like and follow us and subscribe to us. But for whatever it's worth, I hope you found one takeaway that you can start implementing today for your dogs and cats, and share the information gained, plant those seeds with your veterinarian, even if they're against it. What about this, doc? What are your thoughts on this? Been reading this integrative vet, if you don't want to use holistic because it might trigger them to think we don't believe in science. This integrative veterinarian was sharing these resources and these articles and these studies. I'd love for you to take a look at them and let me know your thoughts on that. And one of the books too, I have it here, Feeding Dogs by Dr. Connor Brady. I'll include a link in the description. So you can buy that, gift it to your vet. This is full of studies. Connor did an amazing job with putting studies in there and just gifting that to your vet to have a read. Plant a seed. So many of my colleagues came to the side of medicine because of a seed that was planted by a pet parent like you. That's the impact you can make in this profession. So, buying a $10 book, Dr. Judy Morgan's books, Odette Suter's books, Connor Brady's books. There's so many books out there. Ian Billinghurst's books, and gifting them to your vet will plant the seed to help this movement grow. And we need to come together and stop attacking each other and come together to support one another. That's the way forward to help improve pets' health from a holistic approach. And if you need help and guidance, reach out to us. We have programs that support and help guide you. Our Blueprint program is a lifetime program. So your current pets, they're dealing with gut health issues, you're feeling stuck, there's another way forward, but you're not getting the results or the answers that you need. That is what we help you achieve in our Blueprint program. So just send a message, send us an email. We can guide you to more information. We can jump on a discovery call to make sure it's a good fit for you. That's always key to me. Will this work for what you're looking to achieve and help transform your pet's health? That is my mission. That is what I'm here for. And so I hope that helps you. I hope that enlightens you a bit about some of these common myths and the truths that are out there that we can share with our veterinarians, share with other pet parents, start planting those seeds and grow this beautiful flower garden of just improving our pets' lives through optimal species appropriate nutrition and a holistic approach. I'm Dr. Katie Woodley, the Natural Pet Doctor, and I will see you all again next week for our weekly coffee talk with the doc. Take care, everyone.